Hi there, welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to talk about processing records. We have seen that in our normal event flow, whenever a new trigger is received by your event source, it flows through complete process and the process ends. But what if you have to read a file which is having lakhs and lakhs of data, or you have to read database table which is again have millions of record? It your sequential flow might not be sufficient to handle such big load. So in this case, batch jobs are used. How does batch job work? Basically, overall, there are four steps as part of batch job. First is input. In input, again, it acts like trigger. Something is triggering your flow. Then you have your load and dispatch phase. It is implicit phase. It is taken care by MuleSoft itself. Then comes process. Process is the way we have seen earlier. This is required phase. Here is where you process or transform your data. And on complete is again optional phase. So let's see each of these in depth. I get many questions from students on batch processing. It is difficult for them to understand. So to make it easier for you to understand, I want to map the example of paddy fields. What happens in the fields? First, they collect all the paddy heaps in their farm. So this is like your input. When you get input, it is in this format. Now, if you have to process it or transport it, can you transport it just like this? No. You first need to sort it out and you need to make a collection. Here, for example, bags of rice. So, you must be creating collection of records. That is what is done by MuleSoft. Again, load and dispatch phase is implicit. This all activities are done by MuleSoft itself and you don't need to do anything for that. Then comes job instance ID. So job instance ID is a batch ID on each bag. So on this each bag, you have to mention it was part of which batch number. So similarly in MuleSoft for each job, if you have lakhs of records, you can say that you want to batch block size of 100, so that 100 records would be taken into consideration in one job, and then you give name to this job instance ID. It can be automatically populated, or you can use it dynamic. You can provide dynamic job instance ID, but each job must have its unique ID. If it is not unique ID, in case you hard code it, then when second job runs, MuleSoft will throw error that job instance ID is not unique. Now, you created bags, you gave batch ID on each bag. Now, while transporting, what you will do is one by one in queue, you will be start loading it. So that is done in the first phase of load and dispatch. Sec Second phase was process. This is a required phase where actual processing of every record occurs asynchronously. Each record from the input queue is processed through the first step and then sent back to the queue after processing. So this is batch job. Your input records come here. It comes in a batch size mentioned by you. If you have mentioned block size of 100, batch size of 100, then 100 messages will be, picking up for first batch step, and they work asynchronously. They do not need to follow sequence here, and whenever first one is completing the processing of batch step 1, it is queued up for the to be picked by batch step 2. So in this case, it does not wait for all 100 to complete batch step 1 and then all 100 in a block are not moved in the another are not kept ready for another step to be picked. It is managed asynchronously. If this particular transaction has completed batch step 1, it can go to batch step 2. If this transaction has completed batch step 1, it is marked ready for batch step 2. In that way, all the processing happens until all the batch steps are thoroughly executed. And last one is on complete phase. This is optional phase, and it executes in the last when all the records are processed. This phase can provide the inside stats for the batch processing, where we can log or process reporting, emailing the stats. If we convert the stats payload to JSON, you can see payload like this. Here you can see total records were 9, elapsed time in milliseconds is 1229, failed record was 1, loaded records were 9, successful records were 8, and here is your bad job instance ID. Okay, so here it will show you the summary. Remember, from exam point of view, they do ask you on complete what will be the what is the payload being printed or what is the log being printed. In this case, you will never have access to the actual records content. What was processed in your record will not be available in on complete phase. On complete phase is just for producing summary of the batch. Now let's take an example of batch processing. Here in the input, we are passing a payload having different, it is array of objects. In first object, amount is 100. In second object, amount is 40. And for third product, the amount is 2. Now, in your batch processing, you're first having HTTP listener, then you are setting this payload, then you have batch job. Inside batch job, as discussed earlier, load and dispatch is implicit phase. You will not see it in this batch job. Then you have process. In process sections, you can have multiple batch steps. Here you have batch step 1 and batch step 2. For these batch steps, again, you can process them record by record in this section, or you can process them together in aggregator section. For example, if you have to do updating of all records together, then you can write it in the aggregator section. If you want to process each of them one by one, then you put it in the first section. Now here you can also add conditions, which elements of the payload you want to process in step 1. It's not necessary that all these 3 elements need to be processed by all the batch steps. So you can decide which elements to be processed by step 1 and which elements to be processed by step 2, and so on. And one element can be processed via multiple steps as well. Here you just give the filter. And third and most important is on complete phase. In this phase, you can only write the summary. Whatever happens inside your process phase, on complete does not have any information about the actual data. For example, what amount was processed, and the payload which is generated here, or logger that are generated here. Your on complete will not have information about it. On complete is just to print summary as discussed in the last slide. Now, in this question, what is being asked is what will be logged in the logger of the batch step 2. So we have to print this logger. Now let's see how the processing is happening step by step. First step, here all these elements are being fed to your process. Here there are different amounts of product, 100, 40 and 2. Then you go inside the batch job. In this you see first batch step, and here condition is less than 50. Input to this batch job would be, it would be picking from queue. So on in queue you will be having available elements as 100, 40 and 2. Now you want to process in batch step 1 only with amount less than 50. Those are 40 and 2. Now in that 40 and 2 elements are fed to the set payload, and you are adding plus 100. So once you do plus 100 in that, what will be print in the logger of this payload? 140 and 102. Now, when you are moving to batch step 2, what is the input for your batch step 2? Here, many people have confusion. So, batch job 2, consider a main queue. From that main queue, batch step 1 will process few records and put mark them ready for to be processed via batch job 2, and those who were not picked were eligible for being processed via batch job 1. Batch step 1 are also made ready to be processed via batch step 2. So in this case, 100 which was not 100 which was not fed to batch step 1 will be ready to be picked by batch step 2, as well as 40 and 2 which are now changed to 140 and 102 are also available to be picked by batch job 2. So here what is available is 100, 140 and 102. Now when you have 140, when you have 100, 140 and 102, what is the amount condition here? Amount condition here is checking greater than 20. So in this case, all of the three are greater than 20. So you will be able to see all these three, plus you will be also be printing the earlier log. So you will be seeing this as well as these element at the end of this batch job. Let's consider another example for batch job. Here we will be passing payload as A, B and C, and we want to see what will be printed in the logger output. What are we passing here to batch step 1 is A, B, C. Inside this, we are setting payload to the upper payload, and then at the end, in on complete, we are printing the logger. So what will be printed in this logger? We are printing payload. Take 1 second to think about it. If you have guessed it correctly, it will not be capital ABC, but it would be summary of your processing. As discussed earlier, on complete phase is only to show summary. It cannot show what was the payload before in the batch step. Another important concept in batch job is logger in batch aggregator. Now, in this case, we are seeing we are aggregating batch with 3. How it is mentioned is here, batch aggregator by 3, size 3. So here you have to mention size is 3. Now the question is asking what will be printed in this logger. Now scheduler will trigger the process. Set payload is setting payload to A, B, C, D and E. Then we go inside process record batch job. In that we go into process records batch step. In this batch step, it has already a filter. Let's see what is it filtering. It is filtering where not payload contains B. Now from the queue, when this batch step is picking the data, it won't pick B, it will pick rest of it. So it will pick A, C, D and E. Now this will be given to the first activity in transform message. What it is doing is transforming this into upper case. Now what will be output of transform message? It would be A, C, D and E. Now when we are moving to next activity, what will be input to this batch aggregator? It needs size of 3. How many elements do we have? 1, 2, 3 and 4. So it will create now two sets. First set would be ACD and second set would be E. So it will go first, it will put ACD and it will log it, and then it will see E, and then it will replace the earlier logger and it will replace it with E. So here output of this logger activity would be E. Always ensure that when you have logger component, when it runs for the next cycle, only the last cycle will be logged. Not all cycles will be logged here.